UX Podcast Episode 248.
Hello everybody, welcome to UX Podcast, coming to you from Stockholm, Sweden. We are your hosts, James Royal Lawson
and Per Axbom.
With listeners in 196 countries and territories in the world, from Reunion to Togo.
And today we are speaking to Ola Berg. He calls himself a change strategist and an agile guide. He's a person who hopes to help people understand each other, to feel better and work better together, and happens to be really good at doing this.
The best introduction to Ola comes from his own LinkedIn page. Here's what he writes. I have this vision that every workplace should be a safe and exciting environment where people look after each other and are super productive. Not because they are superhumans, but because of the great procedures, the great collaborations, and the great culture.
Ola, I'm really curious about how do you get this passion for agile that you obviously have. I mean, it's what you breathe, it's what you post about. And I'm learning so much from all your LinkedIn posts, for example. But it seems like you're thinking about agile all the time. But how did it start for you?
Well, thing is that I'm thinking all the time, and being a software developer for many years, and I kind of realized pretty soon, working with software in the real adult life, not as a hobby programmer, but in the real adult life, I realized pretty soon that the problem wasn't so much having the computers understanding us humans, but having us humans understanding each other. If we were to make systems that together, or if we should make systems for each other, and so on. So up to that point, I haven't really been interested in things like team dynamics and how people work together and so on, because I was kind of a more computer nerdy guy, I guess. And when I looked into what was then called lightweight development methods, or iterative incremental development, IID, or something like that, back in the days, late 90s, early beginning of the 2000 and so on, it was like a world open for me that actually this is about people communicating. So I got obsessed by communication and how do people interact and how do people understand each other, and that so much of our well-being and not being so well at work is directly linked to how we treat each other and how we how we do it. So at that time it became a mission, because it has to do with how people felt and how healthy they were.
Fascinating. It sounds so similar to my experience with UX. I was also that like computer nerdy guy, and then you start thinking about, well, it's really about the people using the products and services. But it sounds like you're even taking that one step further into the health of the people working within the company will determine the success of the company.
Yeah, and that is not something that I do, but that was, I mean, this things that we call agile and so forth, it is nothing new. It's not even from the year 2001, where the so-called Agile Manifesto was created. It has roots further down in history, and the realization that in order to make good work, you as a worker must feel good. That is a realization that has that has been taught over and over again in history and discovered over and over again in history. And one of the roots to agile software development is in the quality movement of the 80s, and before that lean production or Toyota production system. And what the pioneers at Toyota and in the quality management system, total quality management traditions, they discovered early on that the trick is to create a system, a development system or a production system that takes care of the workers. And if the system takes care of the workers, making the workers feel good, then the products will be good. And people using the products will feel good and be good. So that you have to start there.
This is so interesting because we talk about like human-centered design, and I've wondered. Well, this makes me think about the fact we say human-centered design. So we're adding a category to the end of it, whereas my way of looking at what you've just said is human-centered is actually what you're saying is enough. We don't have to say human-centered organization, human-centered product, human-centered whatever. It's human-centered.
Yeah, basically. Even though I can think that there's benefit in explicitly stating out that now we are focusing on the organization, now we're focusing on the collaboration, on the so that we can put the light on certain things. I guess that's important for us understanding, but to always have this human center in everything that we do, that this profound humanism must always be at the center of what we do.
You mentioned that we keep rediscovering this fact, really. Why do we keep forgetting it?
There are many intuitions around work, for instance, that we people tend to have. If it's fun, it's probably not that valuable. It should be tedious if it's supposed to produce value. Probably because our intuitions of value and work, I guess that they were formed many thousand years ago when we were living on the savannah digging for edible roots. And basically, if you were to eat many roots, you have to dig a lot. Digging is boring, but the fruit of your work, the fruit of your labor, eating the roots is good. So I guess that the intuition, you have to work hard, and then you can enjoy the fruits of your labor. I guess that intuition has come as well, so that you see that there's kind of you put work and enjoying the fruit of the labor as two opposite things, and you don't see that, well, this can't be in harmony.
Yeah, I guess it comes from the basic economics of it, that if you're doing some work for someone else, it's that you have valued the reward for doing that work greater than the time you would have been spent otherwise, because it enables you to do more things. So you're doing something that's less valuable. The actual task is less valuable to you. Otherwise, you do something else yourself. You're getting a reward for that, and then you're using that reward to enable you to do something that's worth even more. So I guess the whole economics behind work is that you're doing something you wouldn't do otherwise because you need the reward, and that's not fun. You'd argue.
Yeah, that could probably explain a bit. Also, that we have intuitions around leadership and who's to decide. I mean, if I'm in a system where you make the decisions for me, then I should not really complain if you make decisions that I wouldn't do, because I kind of accept that system. But that doesn't mean that it has to be that way. I mean, you could, even if you had the power over me, you could still ask me, what do you think, Ola? And how can we create a win-win situation, you and me, even though I'm your boss? But since that's not necessarily the case, and in many times in history, we people tend to slip down to a situation where one person is telling others what to do and expect obedience and so on. So I think that there's also a natural tendency of with authority and that kind of relationship or relations that gravitates towards that. So I think that's also a contributing factor that we tend to forget. It seems against our intuitions that people could have fun and doing productive labor at the same time. It seems against our intuitions that the people on the lowest level of the hierarchy could make decisions and those decisions be more profitable for the whole organization than if someone higher up did it.
It's interesting when you think as well about how when you're looking towards the customers, so an organization, a business and its customers, I mean, there it feels like it's more understood that you need to make your customers happy. There needs to be a collaboration there between the business and the organization so that it's mutually beneficial. You buy that product, the company makes some profit from it, but you get some utility and enjoyment from the product. Whereas if we're looking internally then about in the work we're doing as employees, maybe that relationship isn't quite as obvious.
Mm-hmm. Probably, yes. The relationships between many things that happen in an organization and how that relates to value is not very obvious often. I mean, for one person looking at the organizational chart, they might see that this is how our organization looks, and they might believe then that the value is created within the boxes of the chart. But in reality, the value could be created in relations between people who are in very, very different boxes. As we used to put it in Lean and Agile, we say that the value streams runs across the organization on different levels and back and forth. And that is not obvious. Also, if you look at, for instance, you ask HR, how does our performance management system, what does that look like? And they tell you what it looks like. And you can see that, well, this is obviously not how we create value, but to the people creating the performance management system, that was not obvious. So I think that a lot of the relationships between what is done and the value that is produced, I think that is very obscure in many organizations. And that is also why in Lean and Agile methods, we focus so much on visualizing this. How are things working together? What are the connections? Who is dependent on who, and how does value flow? We try to make this visual so that everyone in the organization understands how value is created.
You're obviously a person who goes into companies and helps them understand why their intuitions may be wrong, why their understanding of the problem may be wrong. Where do you start?
Yes.
How do you go about changing people's minds, essentially?
That's really the key thing, because you need to be able to build rapport, having some kind of faith and confidence in what you're about to tell them. And then you tell them things that they don't initially believe. Especially, it seems like the higher up in the management hierarchy you sit, your views on what is actually happening in organization is very obscured and blurred. Which is why Toyota always have this principle of, hey, manager, you need to go down and see on the shop floor, see with your own eyes what's happening. They work very actively with removing that connection. But in many organizations, in normal organizations, there is a disconnect, which means that I'm brought in to help them because they feel that there is something that is wrong here. They feel that they could work faster, they could produce more value, they could be better in replanning and change direction or whatever they want to do. And I try to point out where I can see that the root cause to their problems are, and obviously that goes against their beliefs. So how do we change that? Well, by being careful, really, and expose these things in a steady but still slow and careful manner, because it can really be shocking at times.
Yeah, I can imagine. I mean, going against your own belief system, that's hard as a human, and so I mean, I guess it usually takes years for someone to change position on something that they've believed for many, many years.
Yes.
Well, I guess isn't there something to do connected to the fact that, you know, a lot of management will have gone to maybe business school or been part of business education, and what they're taught in those courses, perhaps maybe 20, 30 years ago, is a very particular view of the world and how we should be worked. I guess very much related to production lines in many situations, and those production line ways of thinking and ways of pushing your resources in a production line environment is maybe not applicable to how we need to motivate, push, and organize our resources when it's a thinking economy and thinking organizations.
Definitely so, but even then, I would say that what people were taught in business schools in the 90s and forward are actually not very suited for production lines as well. The times where production lines were really improved and the logistics were improved, and what paved the way for the globalization of the 90s was very much the insights from Toyota and the insights from the quality management traditions and the insights from flow thinking of logistics. What I think that people in business schools were taught from the 90s and forward was basically going back even further. They got a picture of value creation that was wrong by then as well, that were more suited for how value was created, like in 1910 or 1920 or something like that.
Perhaps even earlier. I guess we're going back to the Industrial Revolution.
Basically, yes. So I think that during the 90s there was a step backwards. But some things were definitely better by then. We had all the technical revolution that made it with computers, could use resources more efficiently. We got a lot of innovation going. We also got a political change that opened up for globalization and international trade and so forth. But I would say that very much of those good things that were happening in the 90s was in spite of the management philosophy of the time, not thanks to it. And what we see now is maybe where that management philosophy has reached the end of the line, so to speak, and we need to grow further. There is a really interesting thing, an effect here, that when a technical invention breaks through and we start to reap the benefits from that, in order to reap the real good benefits from it, we need to have like 30 years or so of social invention. How we organize around this technical invention, how we form new companies, new organizations, new ways of leading, new ways of interaction, and so forth, before we actually can reap the benefits from it. If it, as someone said, if many of those, so to speak, laws or tendencies that we have, that computers get so and so much faster every year, and memory is so much, and broadband so much faster, and so forth, even if that development were to stop right now, today, then we would still be able to reap the benefits from those inventions for 30 or so years, if we are to believe what's happened historically. Because the real power comes from how we reorganize around the invention. So we haven't, I think that what we're seeing now is the pressing need of reorganizing socially around a world when almost everyone has internet access, and we have computers everywhere, and so forth. The things that we got 30 years ago, basically, that we now definitely have, and now we need to reorganize in order to reap the benefits. And I see that what we are doing with Lean and Agile is basically going back to those management traditions and those ways of doing things from the 80s that we could see is very, very suitable for the kind of world we live in now.
I can think it's really quite a challenge, though, because if we're saying like there needs to be social change effectively over a sustained period, 30 years, then that implies that you need a degree of stability over a sustained period for that change to reap most benefit. Now, if you look at what things have happened over the last 30 years, we've gone from home computers in the workplace, email, internet, social media, mobile phones. There's not a period of more than 10 years of stability when it comes to the underlying technology and the way that we're working. So that surely adds an extra challenge and dimension to the social changes that are needed in order to reap the benefits.
Yeah, I think that we have that there are two things. You need stability, and you could say that, well, what we have had during the last 30 years has been a stable progress. I mean, the improvements have been, or inventions have been incremental more than ever. We got internet connection 30 years ago, and nothing revolutionary has happened with that, besides that it has become more wireless and more ubiquitous and more effective. Also, the computing devices has been smaller and handier and so forth, but it's still a progression within the same paradigm. We don't have had really any system shocks that is so needed in order for us to let go of the old ways of doing things. For instance, if you look at the after the World War II, up until through the 60s, up until the 70s, to the oil crisis, basically. There we saw how we could reap the benefits of modern production, modern life, and so forth. That was no really technical invention. The technical inventions there had been done before and during the World War II. After the World War II, with the new power balances in the world and old, like the British Empire in decline, and the US came further and so forth. And at the end of that period, we had a beginning of the Asian wonder there. We needed that kind of disrupting event that were happening basically on a social scale, which was the World War II. So in order to enable these social inventions, historically there had been a need for a disruptive event.
So, Ola, do you think what we're going through now with the pandemic, do you think that perhaps is the social event? If we look at the technology side of things being an incremental change over the last maybe 30 years, that is what we're doing now, with so much working from home and working remotely and so on, and mass unemployment on a scale that we've not seen for generations. Is this the social event that maybe will be a catalyst?
I think that is one of the things. I mean, do you have, for instance, acceptance for remote meetings? I mean, if this is recorded during the pandemic and we are sitting in separate corners of Sweden, basically, or at least Stockholm area, if it had been before, we have been sitting together in the same room, right? Probably. And could be what we've seen from the perspective of Agile and how things are going, that we see that there are many organizations, especially public sector organizations, where there have been a lot of command and control, that management has not allowed people to work from home. For instance, they haven't felt secure that these people are going to do any value, and many of them, those organizations, have reported that they actually create more value now than ever, because the organizations, they have to delegate the power to the workers to decide for themselves what I'm going to do, because the original control structures aren't there anymore. And we've seen an increase in productivity, which you often see when you delegate power to the people on the, so to speak, shop floor, for them to decide and see where do we see we can do the most useful work right now, where can we see that value is produced. So, and many organizations that hasn't dared to let go of that kind of control, now they have to. And all of a sudden they see for themselves that, hey, actually this works. This is not a theoretical concept. We don't have to sit in our boardroom and make this decision. Should we allow people to work from home? We have to, and let's see what's happening. And it's basically, and it really isn't about working from home, but it's working where you decide for yourself. Where can I? Much more than you usually do.
Yeah, I think it's the flexibility too, isn't it, Ola? That if looking at how people are working now and the kind of things that crop up in conversations, people are being more human-centered. Going back to what we started with, that they're actually pausing their paid work at a time of the day maybe when they wouldn't normally, to do something that actually makes them feel better as a human or makes their life better. For example, maybe go and get their haircut at 11 o'clock in the morning, or helping a child, or there's flexibility in your life at a different level when you're working remotely compared to being in an office all the day.
And also I think with the coming unemployment and people feel that, hey, we're going to have a downturn in the economy. What really is needed then is the ability to be flexible, the ability to think things over again, look and say, okay, hey, what is happening? I'm unemployed because the way I were producing value isn't really valid anymore, but that doesn't mean that I can't produce value. Let's see if I can produce value in another way, using new technology or come up with new ideas. So I also think that when, in order to have a good economy where people can flourish, good in every way, sustainable and good for people, we need to kind of optimize for our ability to be flexible. And here is what I believe, that the agile ways of working is a part of those kind of social inventions that we need to learn about and need to practice in order to be able to be flexible and come up with new ideas on how to create value. Because agility is synonymous with flexibility, right?
I love how you're emphasizing how power structures are changing as well in the ways that we are working now during the pandemic, because I mean that is so much part of your message about giving the power back to the workers and building trust and allowing them to make their own decisions in a way that perhaps traditional management does not allow. Do you think this will continue? Do you think people realize this?
I guess that it will be both ways. I guess there will always be a backlash, of course, and there is this. There is this notion that if we are to how do we empower people? Well, we let go of everything. Laissez-faire is synonymous with empowering people, and that is definitely not true. Because if you have a power structure where some people make certain decisions and some people make other kind of decisions and so forth, and all of a sudden many of those decision makers disappear from the scene, that doesn't mean that you automatically empower people or that what comes after that will be good. Because this ability to make decisions in your local team, in your local group, find out what is the most valuable thing we can do and so forth. That is an ability that needs to be trained, and you need to work on it. It is not enough to just disrupt the existing power structure. You actually need to build something new, and you need to train this capability. And what I see is that many organizations, some of them they get this part with, yes, we need to tear down the existing power structures, but they forget about we need to build up the new ones. And when they do that, there will be a catastrophe, and people will not feel very well. They will be badly treated, because just getting the freedom, but no means of handling that freedom in a productive, sound way that is sound for everyone, will lead to new power structures that will not necessarily be any better. So we must build the replacement power structures pretty consciously if we want this to happen and have a good effect. And that is something I see over and over again in organizations, that they underestimate what it takes to build a flexible power structure where you can delegate a lot of power to the workers.
So they run fast to demolish the old system, and running quickly to demolish the old one, they stumble into the situation where they realize they haven't designed or thought about the new one.
Yeah, basically there are two ditches on each side of the road here, and the majority of the organizations, they don't dare to remove their existing power structures, so they're trying to keep the existing power structures and build a so-called agile parallel power structure, and those two power structures, they will just keep each other hostages. And the other ditch is to where they just tear down the existing power structure, and then without replacing it with anything, and then catastrophe ensues. And the middle of the road here is to deconstruct the existing power structure and transform it into something else, very consciously and careful, steady but careful.
What strikes me when I'm listening to this is that, I mean, this implies that everyone has the interest of the organization as the first thing in mind, whereas, of course, lots of people have their self-interest in mind, which means that people will scramble to actually do what gives them the most power in some instances. And it sounds like that would be one of the really difficult things to mitigate and make sure that people don't gain that power. And what you were saying about new power structures appearing if you haven't really designed it in the way that you want to.
Yeah. And I guess that this must be the same problem that you have with UX, right? Because in theory, everyone was interested in the user and the user experience, and that the design is good for the user. But in a large organization, many people, when push comes to shove, they really aren't that much into the user. They are much more into their own safety, their own or their own claim to fame within the organization and so forth. So the strategy or tactic that we use in Agile is to make this visible. Try to visualize how different actions affect the organization and the quality and of the work we do and the value, so that and also visualize it fast, so that there's a much clearer link between people's behavior in the organization and the outcome, which means that destructive behavior should be seen. The destruction it makes should be seen very quickly. So we use visualization and transparency tools to make this kind of awakened nervous system within the organization. If you look at the organization as an organism, the visualization, the feedback loops, the transparency becomes a nervous system, so that the whole organization reacts as soon as a part of the organization starts to behave in a way that isn't good for the whole. And I guess you could do the same in a good design system.
Okay.
Right? If you work with explorative or if you work with users and user experiments continuously and make the results of them visible, then you would call out any behavior that is not in the interest of the user. In the same way, we do try to visualize what's happening in a way that calls out any behavior that is not good for the organization.
Yeah, I mean, I guess a lot of this ties back to the classic prisoner's dilemma experiments, where you can short term, you can trick each other and you try and maximize your selfish profits by doing a certain decision. But if you work together, you actually get most returns over a longer period. But you have to have that trust that both of you are going to work together to maximize returns for both of you. And that's the same thing when we're working with user experience or design. You say, well, if we do this, if we optimize this too much, we're going to maximize maybe short-term revenues, but long-term, people are going to be really fed up with the way that we're tricking them, or the way that we're deceiving them, or that we're putting too much emphasis on the company's benefits or the gains rather than the gains for the individual, the user.
Yeah, exactly. And what is needed in order to have a positive net outcome in the prisoner's dilemma are those two things: trust and or transparency.
Yes.
If people in those experiments had the information what the others were to decide, then everyone in the system could optimize for the whole system.
Yes, you collaborate and you maximize.
Yeah,
the visual collaboration.
Exactly. So there are prisoners. They have this dilemma. By not making them prisoners, we fix the dilemma for them so that they can create a positive net outcome for all.
Awesome. Thank you, Ola, for tying this so clearly back to UX. That was really well done as well. I am certainly going to deep dive into some of your blog posts more now as well. You're all over the place always, but there's always a red thread, as we say in Swedish. We've been talking about red threads now, but really, really important messaging for everyone, and certainly for everyone in UX as well. Thank you for joining us, Ola.
Yeah, thank you.
I got quite into the underlying economics of all this with Ola. Listening back, I definitely put my economist hat on a few times there. Which was wonderful though, because we touched on economic social history, economics of production, and labour economics. There was some wonderful things to get your teeth into, and reflecting on it from a design viewpoint or a UX viewpoint or a production of things in our organisations viewpoint.
Yeah. I like how he started with he's a person who's thinking all the time, and it's so obvious how he also gets all of us to think in the way that he expresses himself. I think it's rather eloquent how these are rather philosophical statements that he's expressing, but so it really makes you think about what it means for UX and what it means for business, essentially.
But I like also how Ola, even though you're right, he's thinking all the time, and some of the stuff he's almost philosophical. He's still pragmatic. And
yes.
What he was saying there about the about 30 years of social invention that follows a technical innovation is something very practical about how we need to deal with this. It's not something we can rush into.
Yeah. I mean, we've talked to a lot of our guests about how the internet is a teenager, and I think that message is actually really, really important because I experienced that a lot of people who get into the industry and are really frustrated about how slow things are moving also have to recognize that things have to move slowly to be able to include everyone on this journey.
Or as Ola said, that when we're dismantling old structures, we're creating voids. And a lot of the time, what we're making progress now in the last 30 years, we've been just kicking down the occasional door, and then we're just like filling the void with something new, which also is not planned and not thought through. So what Ola was saying about dismantling old structures carefully, so you can build new structures carefully, is a very, very valuable thought to take with you.
And even now, if we're thinking about COVID-19 and the corona pandemic as a systemic shock, it's interesting to just observe the world and what's happening and how quickly people are jumping to conclusions, and we don't know yet how the world will change in a year or two because of this. But I think it's important that we move slowly still and be mindful of the changes we're making.
Yeah, because I think it is a system shock we're going to go through with the pandemic, because it's global. We don't have global events too often in this kind of way, but there's still a risk that we're gonna fill the void with something that exists now, and a quick polyfill, a quick solution to get us through it, rather than because we haven't planned for this. We didn't spend time before agreeing what we're going to do and fill the new void created by this system shock. But at the same time, I think we've got the chance. If this does, because it's going on for a while, we do have time to iterate, learn, and think, and reflect on how we want it to be, how we want the new normal to be. New normal is a phrase that's coming up quite a bit, and I think there's our opportunity, Per, that we're going through a shock, but we're not. We're kind of trapped in it. We're like in a in between, like a grey zone, where we're not before it, we're not after it. We are in it, and that gives us a chance to iterate and think, and maybe come with some agreement or desire, some plan about what we wanted to be in the new normal.
Right. And as designers, actually, we can contribute to that by envisioning and describing and communicating the different types of futures that are possible after this.
Yeah, enabling the communication between people. And recommended reading. Reading? Well, you can read our podcast. We have transcripts for almost every single episode. But recommended listening for this time is episode 224, The Business Value of Design, with Gene Lidke. Now, the reason why I've chosen this one is because a fair bit of what we talked to now with Ola aligns with what Gene talked to us about, with delegation
Right.
to the workers, to people on the shop floor, and design thinking and business strategy.
Yeah, that's a really good one. And if you can spare a little bit of your time, then join our little community of volunteers. We're always looking for help with transcripts and publishing. Remember to keep moving.
See you on the other side.
So, James, why did the Scarecrow win an award?
I don't know, Per. Why did the Scarecrow win an award?
Because he was outstanding in his field.